Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. It's early Thursday morning, so hopefully everybody had enough time to get their questions in. So let's jump in and see what we got. Starting us out over on Patreon, Weijlo wanted to follow up about the issue with the Game Gear and confirmed the problem was the Eneloop batteries. Even though they were fully charged, they were not delivering enough power to the Game Gear. So after switching over to brand new over-the-counter batteries, it turned on without issue. They did also visually check the recap against some instructional videos and the wiki to be sure, and now they're just getting back to gaming. So that is awesome news. Thank you very much for testing that. And also, I'm 99% sure I discovered the Eneloop issue because of you, because of the awesome people that participate in these Q&As. I think a question came up one time that really sparked me to grab my multimeter and just test, and that's where I saw that the Eneloops were dropping voltage right after a charge. So if you pull them out right out of the charger, you were getting 1.5 volts, but you wait a couple of hours and then it was dropping down to 1.4, and the more time went on, the lower the voltage dropped before it just stopped working. So I still think the Eneloops have their purpose. TV remotes, cheap devices, kids' toys that are probably going to break anyway. I think those are totally fine for that, and the price is right for those scenarios. But the higher end ones should be what we look for handhelds, except I haven't personally tested them yet. So Weijlo said they'll give the ones that I linked to last week a try. Nightcore, I believe, was the brand. So Weijlo, would you mind chiming in on that as well? I think twice, if you don't mind. Maybe right when you get them, let us know if they work. Which, they should work right out of the box, but, maybe play around with it for a little bit and confirm that they still work after an hour or so's worth of use. But also maybe follow up in a couple months or next year and let us know if they're still working. And I think at the very least, if they work out of the box, after a couple hours of use, remember the Game Gear only gets like 6 hours. So I'm talking maybe an hour into it or something. If they're still working, the Eneloops wouldn't. They would probably drop too low. So let's see what happens. But I think that's what's going to determine if a battery pack is needed. Because if these night cores just work, and especially if they work consistently over time, then that's just going to be the recommendation. And not only for Game Gear, I would actually say that for anybody who wanted an unmodded console or unmodded handheld console to just have good rechargeable batteries. But if they have issues, or if they're hard to get, or if there's other reasons why you wouldn't want them, then I'll go back and follow up with Greg from LaserBear and see if he could continue work on the Game Gear version, because then you could just use the same batteries that he had spec'd out for the Nomad and just use those for the Game Gear. You could probably even just swap the batteries between the two if you have both. So I agree. I do wish a third-party pack was, a third-party made by the community battery pack was out there for the Game Gear, but it's something that I want to confirm that we need first, because I don't want to have Greg or anybody else put a ton of work into something that's only going to sell a handful, because these night cores might solve the issue. So thank you, Weijlo. I really appreciate that. I'll leave the links to the night cores in there again just for the heck of it, but that was cool, and hopefully this is just the solution. Next up are a couple of questions from Faithful that I'm not sure if I'm going to have good answers for. So welcome, thank you for supporting, and I'm sorry I might let you down on your first question. But the first question is they have a second-hand HD Fury 3 running the latest firmware that refuses to output 240p when using Mr. via direct video. They have the dip switch configuration in a way that seems to be fine, but they're not able to get it working. So I don't actually own an HD Fury 3. Those HD Fury boxes are always on my list of things I should pick up if I have extra cash, but I almost never have extra cash. So I'll get one eventually. But my first gut feeling is, what is the configuration on your Mr. INI file? Did you remember to set direct video to 1? Would you try a new Mr. INI file? You could even just take the one that's currently on your SD card and then rename it with an underscore original at the end of the file name. Download a brand new Mr. INI file and just set direct video to 1 and nothing else. Don't make any other changes and see what happens. That's certainly a good test for that setup, just to see, because there has been some issues over the years where I've had very cluttered Mr. INI files that caused different problems, never with direct video, but it's just such a free and easy thing to test. I would suggest doing that just in case. And if you have any device that could read that, which, not many can, HDMI outputting device like that, or input device, most monitors won't accept it, even PC monitors that are generally very compatible. But It's certainly something that if you have the ability to test it out, give it a try just to see. But I think the DAC would probably be the issue, the HDMI digital to analog converter. And the next question is they're trying to get surround sound from their Wii U and Switch. And as far as they know, they only support LPCM 5.1 without a SPDIF output. Do I know of any HDMI audio extractor that can output 5 analog channels, ideally via 3.5 millimeter jacks? So, no. However, this might be something that you need to, well, cost, first of all, is going to be an issue, but you might need to just piece together multiple things if this is something that you need for your solution. So, for example, what you could do is get a cheap HDMI splitter and send one to your display and then send another to just a cheap basic AV receiver and see if you find any AV receivers that have dedicated RCA outputs. I don't know any that would use 3.5 millimeter, but RCA to 3.5 millimeter cables are super cheap. So that would be my gut feeling would be if you needed this setup, if you needed surround to dedicated analog, just get a cheap receiver. Now you could look into higher end DACs, but those run anywhere from 200 to 20,000 and up, depending on how crazy you want to get. So, that's totally up to you. The thing about picking up a cheap used receiver somewhere, Goodwill or wherever else, you might end up with something that you could use for multiple things. Maybe, you use it for a little while and then you upgrade your full setup, but now you have a receiver to use for outdoor speakers, a spare room, whatever else. It's a device that, you should probably leave in your basement or attic and you would probably use at another point in time. Whereas a dedicated DAC for something like this to break out HDMI surround sound, once you change your main receiver, then you might not need that at all. So, I'm just trying to approach this I always try to approach these answers from what's the cheapest and easiest way first, and then kind of dig into it, because it's very easy to throw money at a problem that you never actually needed to. So I like to be cautious about this. And if you waste a little bit of your time looking into it, it's not the end of the world for most people. So, kind of just see what you think about those suggestions and go from there. If you want me to clarify anything or if I messed up anything, just re-ask. And once again, welcome. Thanks for the kind words. And sorry I didn't have better answers for you this time. Next up, Brosur is looking into consolized MVS consoles. So essentially, you take a Neo Geo arcade board and you build it into a console so that you could plug it into your TV and use it the way you normally would. And they're generally done with the smaller boards, the MV1C, and some have MV1B, but they work really well as long as the circuits are designed properly. And that is a huge key and a safety issue right here. So they're looking into a bunch of different ones and trying to figure out what to buy. And I have personally tested the Open MVS. That was designed by Avram and Tianfeng, and that circuit is excellent. That is exactly what you would not need to worry about for safety issues. You want to make sure that you get the recommended power supply and all of that stuff as well. And the only downside is it only outputs RGB. Now, it's HD RetroVision compatible, as well as Rad2X, the new RGB cables from Mike Chi, the RetroTink cables. It's compatible with all of that, but essentially, you're just getting a really, really clean RGB signal out of it. But if you need S-Video and composite, you're going to need to look into other solutions. And the Omega MVS is still just a beautiful console, and Quan did a great job on it. And while the stock RGB output is definitely not as clean as the one from the Open MVS, there's the replacement board you could make for that one as well. But also, that was designed at a time where there was no other options, and that supports composite video as well. You could also look into the AliExpress ones, but here's where the issues start. PhoneDork was kind enough to send me one of his to test, and it had a really cool metal shell. It had composite and S-Video broken out, and it had an RGB output circuit that was fine. There was certainly nothing bad about it. I don't think it was as clean as the Open MVS's, but nothing that you would be disappointed in. But the sync voltage was too high, and it would blow out any SCART equipment that you connected it to. So I was just able to add a resistor to the sync pin on the SCART cable that I use for it, triple check it on the oscilloscope, adjust where needed, and all done. But the problem with that stuff is this is now a non-standard cable plugged into a box that looks like you should be able to just plug a Neo Geo cable into it. So the next person who gets that needs to remember you have to only use this particular cable on it. And that's where I start to get a little leery on this stuff. So uh, if you were looking for something that had all of those features, I would certainly look into, and cost is going to be a huge factor. If you really needed all of the different video outputs, then the Omega is just a gorgeous looking console. It looks like a stock. It looks like what SNK would have released if they only had one board revision and they didn't have the home kit as well. So that's a great one, but it's expensive. The ones from AliExpress are often very good as long as you have the ability to check voltage on them. And as long as you only get the ones with just standard Neo Geo inputs, because a lot of the ones that have different controller adapters in them add latency. Not all, and I don't have the budget to test all of them, and they're always changing their designs anyway. So even if I did, it's not something I could chase down. So while some of them could be perfectly fine, it is my gut feeling and my strong opinion that only get ones with Neo Geo controller inputs, because there's no quote unquote circuit. It's just direct on-off signals coming from the controller. So there would be zero latency in absolutely all cases on the controller inputs. And certainly with analog output, there's going to not be any latency issues as well. If you were looking to get HDMI output and you really didn't need any of these other signals, the HDMI kit with Abrams OpenMVS is absolutely the one to go for, because you're getting true digital to digital signals coming out of that. There's not a scaler in there, which means even if you had something like a RetroTink 4K, you're getting true digital, original Neo Geo MVS hardware going to a scaler that could do that to 4K with all the crazy filters and options and all that other stuff as well. So really, if the budget allows and HDMI is your goal, that's the one to get without a shadow of a doubt. And maybe someday somebody will make some kind of fun injection molded case for the OpenMVS that looks more like an AES console. But for now, I was really happy with the look and feel of it, and certainly the performance of it. And just, not that it ever has skewed my opinion, but just a polite reminder that I don't have any affiliate links on any of this stuff at all. So there is absolutely nothing other than performance, in my opinion. Although if there was an affiliate link, I would just tell you. I'm sure I could come up with one for an AliExpress thing, but I'm always transparent about this stuff. So as for others out there could be some absolutely amazing ones. There could be ones that perform equal to all of the other best solutions, but you have to be wary. And the number one thing is any kind of controller conversion always has the potential for lots of latency. That Behar Brothers super gun that they put out had like 2 frames of lag on the controller input. So, I think they had the ability to upgrade that firmware eventually, but it's still something that if you're taking the time to have original arcade hardware to play a console that's really centered around fighting games, you don't want any added latency whatsoever. Or if you did, you would want it to be a worthy trade-off, like you use a Bluetooth dongle and get less than half a frame, like 6 milliseconds of latency. Fine, that's a worthy trade-off in most cases, but not just because somebody used a lower quality signal. So I would really just start with those 3, the AliExpress metal case ones. If you want cheaper and you want composite and S-video out, knowing that you're going to need to do some modifications to the cable or the signal or something. But really the OpenMVS is king, because that one had the whole goal of that project was quality, safety, and then of course, ease of use and all that after. But it was really started out as, let's make something that's open source, that has the best quality we know how, with the most overall cost efficient way to do it. So I guess I rambled a little too long about that, but that's something that I'd had quite a lot of experience in, because I just always loved the idea of having a consolized Neo Geo at home to play the cheaper MVS games. Even though they're the same exact game, they're far cheaper if you want original carts than AES. So hopefully I was able to give you all the info you need without over-explaining. Next up, Adam has a PlayStation Portable, and they're looking to connect it to their consumer-grade CRT, that's 480i Max, with component video. They have component video inputs, and all of that works. However, it only takes up a small portion of the screen. It's centered with black bars on all sides. So they're trying to figure out what they could do to make it fill up more of the screen. and they already own a RetroTink 4K CE, so they're looking for any suggestions there. And what I think is the best bet in this scenario, because you already own the Tink CE, I would not tell somebody to go buy one just to try this, but because you already own it, I would set your PlayStation Portable to progressive scan mode, and then so it outputs 480p, and then use the Tink CE to downscale to 240p and kind of crop and zoom as needed. Now, this will probably result in uneven lines because you're not getting a perfect integer of the resolution, or maybe you won't be able to half it and also fill up the screen the right way, but experiment with it. So take the output, cut that in half, output 240p and see what happens. Zoom accordingly, see what you like, and just give it a try. It could end up looking exactly the way that you had hoped, and everything will play just fine. It could be that you have to downscale to 480i instead and zoom that way, and that might give you a better look for it. But honestly, if you have these things, I would just try them out and see what happens. The only issue would be trying to find an HDMI digital to analog converter that's compatible with 15 kilohertz signals, which is getting much harder. You can get the expensive HD Fury stuff, but the cheaper ones are hit or miss. You could just try buying a couple of different ones off Amazon and return whichever ones don't work, which I don't like doing that. I try to never ever abuse the Amazon return policy. However, if these things aren't performing the way they used to, just return them and say, these things no longer, this exact box that everybody said used to work does not support 480i anymore. It is broken. And hopefully the manufacturers will get enough complaints where they'll just say, fine, I'll fix it. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think we have to wait for people in the community to make our own. And I believe there's one coming out and another one probably going to be out early next year, maybe. But, these things are complicated, and I've heard that before. So with all respect to everybody working on them, I can't wait to try them myself, and I will, if they work, I would absolutely promote the heck out of it. So that's going to be your only bump in the road there. But just have realistic expectations, and I mean this with respect, but if this was easy, that would have just been built right in as a standard feature of the PSP. So you're going to have to use tools like the Tink CE or any other downscaling devices. Obviously, for anybody else listening, check out the downscaling section of the website. Marco did an amazing job going through the needs of, or the features for each that match the needs of every setup. So that's kind of a deep dive, but for everybody else listening, if you don't already own something like the Tink CE or 4K Pro, that might be a good way to go about doing it. Also, Adam wanted to know, is there any latency-free way to convert component video to composite video? Their smaller CRTs only have composite, so if this process did work somehow, they're wondering if they could actually get this running on a composite-only TV. So I'm going to skip through this because I've talked about this quite a lot, but in order to go from higher-end signals like component and RGB to S-video is fairly easy, and you get a pretty good image out of it, and certainly in your use case scenario, it'd be fine. But going to composite video, you're going to get tons of weird color issues. And in order to get around that, you need a variable capacitor in order to dial this in. And the only box that I've seen that has this is the one from Retro Castle, which is still not released. And I still don't really know why. I think Ivory just got really swamped with work and wasn't able to finish a lot of these projects. And that is only an RGB to composite converter. So you would need to go component to RGB to composite to make that happen. So, from that point, I don't know, that might be a little bit too much, but I do hope that other people are going to work on projects like this so we could have choices and options for things like that. And I'd certainly will be posting all over RetroRGB and the podcasts and everything when those things are released, because there are way more people than you would expect in your exact same scenario, or also in a scenario where they have like a full RGB setup going into a Tink 4K, into a beautiful OLED, but they just picked up an amazing 27-inch CRT that's in great condition, but only has composite video inputs. So at the moment, that scenario, you would just buy composite video cables and have to swap them around. But having a converter that you could pass everything through would actually be perfect for that scenario. That way the original signal goes right to your scaler and the converted composite can go to the TV. So hopefully those things will eventually be released, but there's certainly nothing that can go to composite today that, at least that I know of, that would work the way that you would hope. So, give that stuff a try and let us know how you make out with it, because it seems like a fun experiment. Next up, Demo Kirby wants to know if there's any word on when Voultar will be selling his next batch of the SNES Edge Enhancer. No, but he is trying to get everything up and running again. He had some health issues that he talked about, and he's bouncing back from it. But after the first thing happened, he tried to dive right back into work, and that just burnt him out immediately. And it was he admits that was kind of his own fault. You know, he kind of hit it too hard. It needs to just slowly walk back into things. So he's been catching up with the existing stuff. He's been trying to get all of that out, and then we'll be re-releasing the board in its same exact form, but just another batch of it as soon as possible. But, you know, health is something that everybody takes for granted until it's gone. So I completely understand. And he does feel really bad that he had to kind of slow things down after so many delays, which, you know, I had no problem busting chops about how many delays there were for that project. All of them were worth it in the end, of course, but unfortunately, there's just more that's out of his control. So, you know, I'll post on RetroRGB when more go up for sale. Obviously, follow on social media if you want instant access to that stuff, and just kind of go from there. But, you know, sorry that there's no better answer, and thanks for the kind words. Next up, Rob has a question that I'm not sure I'm actually understanding the question right. I barely slept last night, so maybe I'm just loopy and stupid this morning. I'll apologize in advance if that's the case, but let's walk through it and just see if we could get more info, and maybe I could answer it better next week or something like that. First, they decided that their multi-switch setup is best going into the dedicated inputs of the RetroTink 4K. So the SCART switch go to the SCART input, the component switch go to the component input, and then their modded Virtual Boy going into the VGA input. But their question is about getting a second output over to their PVM. Previously, they connected their G-Comp switch output, going 1 to the RetroTink, and then 2 into a Tink transcoder, and then into the PVM. So your PVM can't accept component video. Some can't, but it's not common, especially the Sony ones. Most can actually accept both. So I'm not sure why you would be using a transcoder in that setup. And that's part of my confusion. So maybe there's a good answer and I'm just missing it. So once again, sorry if this is me here. But now that they're bringing a G-SCART switch into the mix, they're wondering about the options available. So right off the bat, if you're talking about running component and SCART into a PVM, if you have multiple inputs, you could certainly do it that way. The PVM I have sitting over there actually has 2 inputs, so I configured one for component and one for RGB, and that would be all you need. You could try to run it through a more basic switch, and you could, even if you use something like a push button SCART switch like the Retro Gaming Cables one, you could just use a component to SCART cable, which doesn't convert anything. It just runs the signals through, and you could just switch back and forth and then switch into your, switch the configuration of your PVM to match the signal as well. Or I guess if you had to have RGB, you could try to do something like run the G-Comp into the G-SCART and have the second output going to your PVM, and just kind of figure it out from there. But also, Rob mentioned that they happen to have an Extron RGB 203 RXI, but they don't have any video cables for it. So I guess, would you mean for the 203 RXI, do you mean that you would have the G-Comp going into one, the G-SCART, one input of it, the G-SCART going into the other, and then just run that directly out to your PVM? If that was the case, I think it would work, but I can't remember if I've ever run component video through the RXI. I think it should work. I don't know why it wouldn't, but I just don't know if I've had any personal experience. And in that setup, you would need VGA to, you would need a SCART to VGA solution, which is the opposite of the RetroTink cables that just came out. Those are VGA to SCART. So you would need to have something like that made, and you would there would be some issues with that because the Extron RXI interfaces require a higher level sync, so you might have to have a custom cable made if you're using RGB for that. On the output side of things, if you're going into a PVM, double check the manuals, but the higher voltage sync should be completely fine because it's not SCART. You're going into the BNC inputs of an industrial monitor that should be able to accept those signals. Just always double check because you don't want to blow anything out just in case. So I'm not quite sure where else to go from here. I think you're just going to need to clarify some of this stuff. And once again, if I'm just missing it, I'm sorry, blame the lack of sleep. But I think if you just clarify what you're trying to do, I should be able to help out. And also make sure to let me know the model of your PVM, because that might be a very big factor in this. If it's like the one I have where you have multiple inputs and multiple ways to go about it, then this is going to be a very, very easy solution. Next up, Dustin Madison is looking for some advice trying to find a venue to film an event. And Dustin's event is going to be a comedy show, but my advice would be identical if your event was a retro gaming tournament or a metal show or just meeting up to film an interview somewhere or a swap meet or whatever else. It's all the same, and it all has the same issues and speed bumps along the road to get there. First and foremost, if audio is a priority, you need to find a place that has decent audio in the crowd, I guess is the best way to describe it. So if you're trying to record an interview with somebody or I guess a comedy show where one person is talking and everything is really echoey, that's going to be a problem. And of course you could use software to reduce echo, but anything that you could do to preserve the original recording is always going to be way better than anything you do in post, even though that technology is getting much better. But you also need to just think of everybody else who's going to that venue. So let's say you rent out a VFW or something, you have your retro gaming tournament, comedy show, podcast recording, whatever else. That should be fine because that's a dedicated place. So you have people come there. Try to make sure you arrange the mics in places to pick up like crowd noise as well as mic whoever's up there. And that's the same with the tournament too. You want to mic the players who are playing, you want to mic the commenters, but you also kind of want some background noise to mix in there if you're going to be recording it. Because when things get heated, it's a lot of fun. It makes you feel like you're there a little bit more. But definitely avoid mixed venues because you have to put yourself in other people's shoes. And while everybody kind of has their own story for this who's performed, I've definitely been to places where we were playing a gig and half of the bar is like, we're just here to drink. We don't want to see a metal show. And I feel bad because my favorite kinds of music are not for everybody. I would want to play for people that want to hear that type of music. And I'd be really annoyed if I went to a bar and was just trying to talk to some friends and there was a loud band playing. And the ones that I have seen quite a lot are mismatched comedy shows. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into a bar where there's a sign like comedian playing tonight, and I'm going to meet friends that I haven't spoken to in months that I miss a lot and I want to catch up with. But if we're talking too loud, we're being disrespectful to the comedian, but we're at a bar. We're not at a comedy show talking. We're supposed to be doing that at a bar. And on the flip side, the comedians get really pissed and get angry and get mad at the bar, and everybody loses. Everybody. The crowd who's there for comedy or the metal show or whatever else, the people who are there just to do their own thing. So you got to find a place that has dedicated rooms or dedicated venues. VFWs were always the thing we played up in the Northeast. Those were cheap to rent out, especially for metal shows. Those always seemed to work out. I did know of a lot of bars that had separate rooms. In fact, my favorite bar to go to for years was a karaoke bar, and I don't like karaoke, and I'm a terrible singer. Like, I'm just good enough to sing backup in a metal band, and that's my max for singing. So it's normally not a place you would see me at, except that when you walk in the front door, you walk down a short hallway, and the left is a karaoke room. That's one big room that's got padding on the walls to help for echo and to help for noise going in. But when you walk in, you could also take a right and go down another short hallway into the bar area. So the two groups never met, except for occasionally when they would come in to pick up more drinks and then go back. So that would have been the perfect bar to have something like this at. So for something like a retro gaming event, I certainly wouldn't think alcohol was necessary. For a metal show, a comedy show, yeah, some people need to just loosen up. I certainly prefer it. Even just a beer, just to sit there and enjoy myself. So that's the type of thing I would suggest for venues where alcohol is important to you, is try to find places that have separate rooms or separate dedicated areas, and especially something like that karaoke bar, because that area was already padded. They don't want people up there singing and having it loudly echoing. So you could totally record a podcast, record a comedy show, record whatever else there. It would have been great for a retro gaming event. So that's kind of just my experiences and what I would suggest. Also, Dustin posted a very, very funny story about a terrible gig that they had, which I'll leave this up on screen for anybody that wants to read it. I don't think I could do it justice, Dustin. I would probably just try to read it and as if I was telling the story, and I would mess it up. It'd be like me telling one of your jokes. It wouldn't feel right. So yeah, I don't know. Anybody wants to read it, that made me laugh out loud. But that's definitely my advice for anybody doing events. And you could definitely hear in some of my live interviews where I screwed that up. I had to record in a place that was too echoey. I had to record in a place that was outdoors because there was no quieter place to access. So yeah, I don't know. Good luck with that one, though. It's not easy, but if you find good venues and good people and you get a crowd to show up, stick with it. Make friends with the owner. If they're having a grumpy day, be polite and just be patient and follow up with a thank you email and hope that they warm up to you. Because if you find a good place, that's going to be your go-to for all the important stuff. Well, that's it for this week. As always, anybody who has any questions, please just ask them wherever it is that you support in the latest Q&A post. The way these services work, I can't really figure out what's a new question on an old post. And some days like today, you'll see them only coming from Patreon, but that's just because that's where most people support. Any questions you have on any platform, no problem. I treat them all the same with these Q&As, so just any question you have, just please put it in the latest post. And as always, thank you to everybody who supports in absolutely any way. And of course, thank you to the people who participate in these, because I really do enjoy doing them. So thanks again, and I'll see you next week.